Hello Nurgul. In this short screencast I'm going to give you feedback to last week's summary. Okay, so let's begin. In the video we'll have implicit biases. Okay, good idea. Name of the title of the video, name of the speaker, very nice. Makes the argument that, very good. That forces you to state it argumentatively. Nice. Actions, let's see what the main idea is now. Actions that we do and the way of doing those actions based on issues like race and other differences are inadequate and incomplete. Okay, this is a little bit wordy. Actions that we do and the way of doing these actions. And you haven't even mentioned implicit biases here. You know, the whole video is about implicit biases, right? So what he was saying was that our discussion about bias and differences is inadequate and incomplete. But you don't have to repeat his wording. Just think, once you've seen the video, what is the main idea? Obviously, it's got to be about implicit biases, right? So we all have our implicit biases, or we're all prone to implicit biases, but there are steps that we can take to solve the problem, or something like that, because really the video is kind of in two parts. One was he was discussing the three characteristics, and the second part he offered three recommendations. And you said that here, three characteristics and three reasons. He calls them reasons, but they're really recommendations. So all of that, you should capture that in the first sentence, because right now it's a little bit unclear, right? But the rest, in this first sentence, the rest is quite good. You have all the components. So I would say rephrase that. And you definitely need to mention implicit biases right from the beginning, because that's what it's all about. We all have implicit biases, so what can we do about it? Makes the argument that our biases, blah, 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 you know, like that. And so you need to include the fact that we all experience them, we all have them, but there are necessary steps we can take to solve the problem, or something like that. Now here, he does start with a little bit of a definition of what these are, kind of introduces the audience to implicit biases, and then he goes on and talks about the characteristics. So you can also include a bit of an introduction about what they are, these biases, before you move on to discuss the characteristics, but you're just taking too long here, you see? This should really be one very, very short sentence. And so there's quite a bit of repetition here, with the suggestion of the science community, which states that of the community to make, you see? And another thing is, there is no need to repeat the wording, the phrasing of the speaker, because remember, in our summary we're also trying to avoid plagiarism. So basically you should rephrase using your own words as much as you can. Now there are some terms, some of the key terms like implicit bias, automatic associations, characteristics. Yeah, sure, these things you're not going to rephrase because that's terminology, implicit bias, automatic associations, but everything else really should be in your own words. Okay, so again, rephrase that and make it much more concise, which will save you some space later on to discuss both the characteristics and especially the three recommendations in a little bit more detail, because that's what the video is all about, right? So we can just say, basing his findings or basing his claim on recent research, Hockett asserts or states that bias is blah blah blah. It's something very, very short. Okay, and again, to move to a different and better place regarding issues, another difference, all of that is just words that he used. So you want to use your own words. Okay, according to the speaker, bias is the preference. Again, this is exactly his wording. So you see how this little introduction comes in the middle of your paragraph, and it should come right after the main idea. Once you've mentioned the main idea, you can say bias is prejudice against a person or group of people or something like that. But that's it. Just very, very briefly, not using so many words. Okay. According to the speaker, yeah, and it will be characterized by 3 characteristics. Just use the word 3 in these summaries. Now here, I would say that's where you need to spend a little bit more. You need to explain what these are in a little bit more detail. See? So if you make that shorter, all of that text here, if you make that shorter, that will give you more space to explain 1, 2, 3. What are these characteristics? And you could separate that into sentences. Each one can get a sentence. So first, Hockett mentions that implicit biases are what? What was the first characteristic? Secondly, implicit biases are blah blah blah. Thirdly, and this is the third characteristic, they work through rapid and automatic mental associations that shape the behavior. Hence, people attach to those associations via attitude and behavior. That's a little bit wordy, but that is the third characteristic. But what happened to the first 2? They are rapid and automatic mental associations. That was the first one. Remember, they were the second one that they are contrary to our own conscious beliefs. Remember that one? And the first one also you need to include. So I would say here, use 3 separate sentences, right, to explain the 3 characteristics. And you can use reporting verbs, he claims. Furthermore, also cohesive devices. Also, Hockett claims that implicit biases are important and can help a country to move forward by 3 reasons. That makes it sound like implicit biases will help the country to improve. But what he was saying was that if we want to improve our society or move forward, as he says, we need to start solving the issue of biases. So they are not a good thing. They're actually, this makes it sound like they're a good thing, right? What you can say, just use your own words. You can say Hockett offers 3 recommendations, 3 necessary steps that we need to take if we want to solve the issue of biases. Something like that. And then again in 3 separate sentences. 1, 2, 3. We can do that. Okay. So this needs to be made very clear. Firstly, we need to blah blah blah. Second, Hockett recommends that we blah blah blah, right? Implicit bias is predictive. See, that's what is a bit of a confusion here. It's not that the bias is predictive and preventive. What he was saying was that we need our approach to fixing the problem of biases, which are a bad thing. Our approach to them should be predictive and preventive. I think that was the second recommendation. The first recommendation was he was talking about how we need to be able to diagnose our own problem. First, we need to develop an awareness of our biases. We should realize, we should diagnose ourselves first and say, okay, I have these biases. That's the first step. And you haven't mentioned it here. So again, explain the 3 steps. The second recommendation he gives is we need to engage in predictive and preventive behavior. In other words, we need to put ourselves in our imagination. We need to put ourselves in a situation and say, okay, how likely am I in this particular situation to experience bias against that person? And if I find that through self-analysis, if I find that I'm likely to experience bias, I should then try my best to avoid those biases in that situation. So that's what he means by predictive and preventive behavior, or an approach to biases. Now, of course, you'll need to explain that with fewer words. So that's the trick here, to explain it briefly, concisely, with your own words, and to make it clear, right? It's not that bias is predictive. Rather, our approach to solving the issue of biases should be predictive. We should be able to predict how likely we are to experience bias in a potential situation, and then try our best to avoid them. So I can say something like that. And then the third recommendation was he was talking about how we should openly discuss our biases without feeling guilty or being ashamed. When we are honest with ourselves and we openly discuss our own biases, then we're more likely to be able to solve that problem, right? That's what he was saying. He's not saying that biases will reduce shame. Open discussion, honest discussion will reduce shame. And again, you don't have to mention his wording, reduce shame. You can just say, we need to be honest, engage in open discussion about our own biases without feeling guilty, and only then can we start fixing the problem. Something like that, right? Okay, finally, Hockett says, here you want to use a more kind of expressive reporting verb, because says is a little bit plain. He asserts, or something like that, Hockett asserts that we need to do internal change to make external change work possible. Okay, that's fine. That's a very good summary of his idea. But again, you don't want to repeat his wording. So again, you want to use your own words. So something like, we need to start working on our own biases first. We need to start from the inside, and only then can we produce positive change in the world. Something like that, right? But overall, you've got a good first sentence, other than the confusion here. You've tried, you mentioned some of the supporting ideas. You missed out on a few of them. And then you do have a good concluding sentence. So I would just say work on the phrasing, use your own words. And maybe a good starting place would be to write a kind of a brief scaffold, a brief summary of the points. So of what you're going to do before you start writing the summary. So you're going to say, first I'll write the main idea, then I'll write the 3 characteristics, then I'll talk about the 3 recommendations, and then I will conclude. So if you can start with a short plan, right, like a blueprint of what your summary is going to be, then you're more likely not to get lost. Okay, but overall we have mentioned quite a few of those important ideas. So I hope that is helpful, Nurgul. Good luck.